Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the final day of our conference. My name is Jelena Guga. I'm a research fellow and coordinator of Digital Society Lab here at the Institute, and I'll be moderating Stefan's talk today. Stefan Lorenz Sorgner, you already met him, so I will just give a brief introduction for whom of you who don't know. He's a meta-humanist philosopher, Nietzsche scholar, philosopher of music, and an authority in the field of ethics of emerging technologies. Stefan teaches philosophy at John Cabot University in Rome, and he's the director of Beyond Humanism Network. His talk today is entitled, "What are the meta-humanities?" So it's a kind of a new revolutionary concept that Stefan is introducing, and basically he will talk about the effects of post-human paradigm shift on higher education. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot for the kind introduction. Well, basically, the challenge is what I realized sort of already more than 20 years ago, being occupied with sort of Nietzschean approaches, then transhumanism, critical posthumanism. It's sort of, it's these revised understanding that we humans are actually part of nature. We are not separate from nature. That's not something which is considered seriously in most humanities, in philosophy courses where I studied. You know, what was taken for granted is we as humans stand out. When I dealt, we stand out like in a categorical way. We have got a special status. And that is just widely taken for granted. If you deal with ethical issues, it is the concept, it's a legally valid concept that only humans are persons. And that's most widely shared in sort of legal constitutions all over the world. There are hardly any exceptions. And that is the basic challenge, actually, which we are confronted with. Sort of, it was a paradigm shift which was initialized maybe only 200 years ago, but basically in the humanities, it hasn't arrived yet. You know, many philosophers, many thinkers, many scholars from the humanities don't take it seriously yet, don't realize the full impact, don't dare to think in that, don't dare to integrate it in the courses. And there was the need sort of to start talking about the issues. Actually, in 2009, here in Belgrade, sort of the Beyond Humanism Network got started with a conference, annual conference series, which continued then for a long time up until 2019, 2020, sort of as a consequence of the pandemic. It stopped. It will be relaunched very soon again. But as a consequence, sort of we brought scholars from transhumanism, from critical posthumanism, and so on together in order to discuss these issues. Here the conference was called Humanism and Posthumanism in 2009 already. But sort of the response I got from people I talked to, and well, isn't that, so when we should talk about sort of the revised self-understanding or about the implications and ethical challenges with which we're confronted was as a consequence of the new technological innovations. Then or about the possibilities of AI, deep learning, and so on. And the response I got, well, this is just something for young people. Maybe for young boys who've been sitting in front of the computer too long, they talk about like computer games and the implications. That's not something which can be done academically. That's not a serious subject to be taken into consideration. And in order to take it seriously into consideration, well, at least there must be a journal. And so we were working on launching a journal, and the journal was launched actually, it took us, we started talking about that in 2013, 14. It took us 4 years, I mean, to establish that new field, post-human studies. We had altogether about 20 anonymous reviews from very different publishing houses. And we got altogether 4 very prestigious publishing houses making us an offer. In the end, we went for with Penn State University Press, and then we launched sort of the Journal of Posthuman Studies, which since 2017 has been coming out online as well in print. And we've got Karen Barat is in the editorial board. We've got Rosie Braidotti. There is Luciano Floridi from the AI community. There's There are Steve Fuller, Catherine Hales, we've always been posthuman, Julian Zabolescu, Stellark, the artist, Eduardo Kach. So I encourage you also to feel free to submit your articles, or encourage your students to submit articles to the journal. It's about, it really deals with all the different aspects of the posthuman. It's the first journal in the world explicitly dedicated to the posthuman. It's a double-blind, peer-reviewed journal, so it fulfills all the traditional academic criteria. So now you can now we've got a journal, so it actually exists as an academic discipline. So we've got the proofs. I might just sort of hang it around, have a look, and you can pass it around. And then it was a challenge actually to see. Well, there have been so many classic tests which have been discussed. So where did the notion of posthumanism, transhumanism come from? Who were the first to talk about that? And they all were published in scattered journals. Transhumanism, everyone have been mentioning sort of the book by Julian Huxley, New Bottles for New Wine from 1957 as the first place when it was published. All the classic scholars even mention, established scholars mentioned that at the starting point, but actually it was first published in 1951 in a very remote and very specific journal, very difficult to get hold of. So we decided, well, two scholars, Evi Sampaninko, she's an art historian, a professor at the University of Aegean, and Jan Stasienko, he's a cultural study communication scholar from Poland, from Wrocław, and they've put together an amazing reader, posthuman studies reader, with sort of the classic test. It only sort of came out last year as a hardback, and in September, so only like one month ago, it came out as a paperback. Again, this is something I strongly recommend, because it's just very useful if you want to get an understanding. You're more familiar with transhumanism, you want to get an understanding of posthumanism, or vice versa, or you want to have a text basically for a textbook for teaching posthuman studies. So that's something I strongly recommend. Again, I will hand it out. Maybe it's of interest for you to see. So the posthuman paradigm shift is a decisive phenomenon that characterizes several central aspects of our times. I use the following words to capture a central element of the posthuman paradigm shift for the description of the Journal of Posthuman Studies, which was launched in 2017. As the boundaries between the human and the others, technological, biological, and environmental, are eroded, and perceptions of normalcy are challenged, they have generated a range of ethical, philosophical, cultural, and artistic questions that this journal seeks to address. Because this revised understanding of who we are as human beings basically has an effect on all aspects of our life world. And you don't have to agree, obviously, with posthuman, with transhuman, but you need to take seriously the impacts. You need to take seriously also the technological challenges. And we need to find legal responses. We need to find responses in education, sort of how to deal with these issues. The students need to be made aware of what is going on and different possible responses. And then they need to find an answer, sort of, what is my stance? What do I actually subscribe to? And this erosion is a central anthropological twist which goes along with significant current cultural developments, and which also apply to the two best known contemporary cultural as well as philosophical movements, transhumanism and critical posthumanism. Both traditions employ the word posthuman within their reflections. Which was the main reason for referring to this field of studies, which is concerned with the reflection on the eroded dualistic boundaries between the human and the other, posthuman studies. But at the same time, it needs to be noted that there's a great plurality of meanings associated with the posthuman. So actually just clarifying what the posthuman stands for is part of posthuman studies. Now, in critical posthumanism, the posthuman stands for a philosophical redefinition of the human. The posthuman is not the result of a biological evolution, because normally when you mention the term to students, they think about sort of the Übermensch, overhuman. That's normally the initial connotation it has, but that's obviously not what it stands for in critical posthumanism. It's a result of a cultural process of redefinition. And during the last 200 years of the unfolding Enlightenment, thinkers have criticized absolute. Darwinism undermined humanist convictions of human exceptionalism. For posthumanists, humans are not categorically separate from the natural world, but are entirely embedded in processes of becoming, so that the difference between humans and other animals becomes a gradual one. The majority of transhumanists also praise a naturalist, non-dualist understanding of human beings. And that's the important issue to realize. That's very often not being recognized. And there are some transhumanists who hold a dualist understanding of human, but the majority, that's basically what summaries, what studies says. They embrace a non-dualist understanding in the same way as critical posthumanists do. But this is not their main focus of academic inquiries, because the transhumanist focus is on the normative implications of this revised understanding of human beings, promoting our capacity to continue our human to animal evolution onto post-human stage. So it's really the understanding that, humans came about 400,000 years ago. The last common ancestors between humans and great apes was 6 million years ago. Well, where will we be in 400,000 years? We will not be here anymore. Either we will have died out or we will have developed further. Now we've got the possibility to actually change who we are by means of technologies. Where are the boundaries? And that's the central question for transhumanists. By using pharmaceutical, genetic engineering, prosthetics, eventually mind uploading. For transhumanists, the post-humanist evolved human, which might still consider itself human, or it might begin to consider itself as belonging to a myriad of new species. So the post-human might still be a member of the human species, having at least one capacity which significantly goes beyond the human capacities, but it might be a member of a new species. It might be an uploaded mind. So again, a great variety of different definitions. Even though both posthumanists and transhumanists use the notion of the posthuman to discuss implications of emerging technologies, there's little intellectual exchange between members of these two traditions. It might even be legitimate to highlight there's a widely shared hostility between members of both traditions. Besides the fact that both traditions embrace a new anthropology and reject the traditional humanist account of human beings as consisting of an immaterial soul and a material body. I personally think it is very much related that transhumanists and posthumanists belong to different kind of pedigree, to different kind of cultural tradition. It's more a difference concerning style. It's more of a difference concerning which cultural tradition do I belong to? Do I talk about Deleuze and Foucault? Do I use more metaphorical language? Do I use a more dialectical way of thinking? Or do I belong to the sort of the Anglo-American evolutionary tradition? Do I have resonances with analytical bioethics, applied ethical theories? Many of them have more utilitarian understanding, and that implies a very different usage of language and talking about the things, even though the content in many circumstances, there are extremely many resonances which one can find. Transhumanists use this new anthropology as a warrant for a grand vision of post-human progress, and many post-humanists suspect that transhumanists, and in particular the goal of mind uploading, of being a crypto-religious affirmation of spirit-body dualism and human exceptionalism. Are transhumanists simply hyperhumanists? That's a question which is dealt with in the post-human studies. Transhumanists insist in response that mind uploading is a scientific project, not a supernatural one. The goal is copying the brain's wetware, not capturing the soul. As some posthumanists affirm the neo-Spinozist ontology, it could even be argued that for them it shouldn't be problematic to attribute mental capacities to a computer. If you've got a Spinozist, then it shouldn't be a problem to say that the computer also has mental capacities. However, most critical posthumanists are extremely critical of mind uploading, as they identify this procedure with the traditional humanist endeavor. They suspect that it presumes a dualist ontology. This is a misunderstanding of the concept of mind uploading, as it's a technological project involving an empirically accessible mind and body. It's still both in the empirically accessible realm. It's not a hypernatural one which presumes an immaterial mind. I mean, you can be suspicious of mind uploading, and I'm not very I don't think that's a likely option. But it's a very fascinating project. It's something which, interestingly, has a lot of resonance, and it gets dealt with in many movies and Netflix series. And it's something, it questions who you are as human beings. Are we just the functions in our brains? And in that case, is it possible, sort of, if we're just the software on the hardware of the body, is it possible to transfer it to another device like a computer? And in principle, it seems to be possible because, well, all our bodily cells get exchanged every 7 years, no? So but the personality, something remains the same. So the personality can be disentangled from the body in some way. Anyway, that raises all of these questions basically concerning who we are as human beings. Human exceptionalism in its Greco-Roman pedigree. Being intellectually engaged with philosophical challenge concerning the variety of meanings of the concepts posthuman is a central aspect of doing posthuman studies. There's a wide range of further challenges which are founded upon the posthuman paradigm shift. As a history of human exceptionalism can be traced back for more than 2,000 years and has had an enormous impact on our current cultural condition, both in an explicit manner as well as due to its having left encrusted cultural relicts. The history of human exceptionalism is closely connected to Rome, even though initial traces can already be found in the Platonic context of Athens. I mentioned sort of before the allegory of the cave, you know, the sun outside and we are in the darkness inside the cave. Human exceptionalism, which is rooted in the understanding that humans have a categorically special ontological status in the world, has been justified by reference to the immaterial human soul, free will, rationality, autonomy, as well as human beings having been created in God's image. There are all various ways of referring to the same thing. So that's the reason for us having the divine spark. And that is a long-standing tradition. And it's still, this is where sort of the understanding is rooted that we are persons and animals are not, which is still so widely shared. Oh, and legally valid, basically. Thereby, human exceptionalism is connected to dualism, anthropocentrism, and essentialism. Only human beings possess the immaterial divine spark. Other natural entities belong solely to the natural world. This self-understanding creates a duality between the solely natural beings and human beings whose nature is dualistic, natural as well as non-natural, by possessing an immaterial divine spark. In the natural world, only human beings possess the divine spark, which makes human beings special. And this logic has justified an anthropocentric bias. Furthermore, the natural world is understood as a world of permanent change, whereas it's a non-natural world which is characterized by an essential stability. Consequently, it's this self-understanding which justifies an essentialism, the essentialism which lies in this immaterial realm. This human exceptionalism is connected to substance dualism, anthropocentrism, and essentialism. Furthermore, human exceptionalism has gained further cultural connotations. Our exceptionality lies in our divine rationality. Men are more rational than women, thus sexism was generated. The divine was connected to the sun, whereas the earth was related to darkness, thus racism came about. Humans possess a divine spark, whereas this does not apply to other animals, thus speciesism was justified. Truth and correspondence to the world can only be grasped by means of our immaterial rationality, thus aletheism gained relevance. Aletheism in the sense that sort of there's a lot of problems in just affirming anything in truth and correspondence of the world, which is universally valid, because everyone else who doesn't subscribe to it then is wrong and needs to be attacked or corrected, which is an enormously paternalistic shift. Sort of moving away from the notion of truth and correspondence is one part of actually the post-human paradigm shift. Given this short summary of the various implications of human exceptionalism, the logic of various types of discrimination can be better understood. Humanities too are structured around this human exceptionalism. The word humanities comes from the human word humanitas. The use of the word humanitas in the Stoic context and in the writing of Cicero has been particularly influential. Here it can be identified with the Greek word paideia, which can be translated as education. The identification comes out clearly in Cicero's De Oratore, and in addition, the Latin author Aulus Gellius from the 2nd century CE explicitly identifies paideia and humanitas in his text Noctes Atticae. So in this tradition, the concept of humanitas encloses both ontological as well as ethical elements. And the same can be said of the word dignitas, which was first used by Cicero in his book De Officiis on Duties, in such a way that it attributes a non-credulizable quality to all human beings, or rational beings, which are the same according to Cicero. So in Cicero we find for the first time sort of the notion, sort of there's a non-credulizable quality that makes all humans, as rational beings equal, but actually, it's the first time one can find that in Ammonius Saccas, which is a teacher of Cicero, but he didn't leave any written traces, so let's stick to Cicero for the time being. Cicero's notion of dignitas then was received and further developed by Kant. Kant was actually reading Cicero, and that had an impact sort of on current deontological theory. So here we can see the entire tradition of that notion of where dignity, human essentialism and exceptionalism are related. And his understanding is still of central relevance. That's the foundation of the German foundational law, for example. And it has consequences for how we see, how we deal ethically with the human today. The concept is an ontological one. It also implies a certain anthropology, but it's also an ethical one, as it demands that the entities that possess dignity ought to be treated in a specific manner. Dignitas, in this sense, was derived from the word humanitas. So the notion of humanitas has similar implications. First, it implies a categorically dualist anthropology, which affirms the categorically special status of human beings. And this comes out clearly in Cicero's affirmation of the immortal soul. The Greek notion of paideia has comparable implications, which can be seen in Plato's analogy of the divided line. And second, both humanitas and paideia have an ethical dimension which traditionally has been connected with a perfectionist ideal. The Stoic sage who possesses all the virtues and Plato's philosopher king are two such examples. The meta-humanities. Humanity stands the twist. So not only have the humanities been derived from the Latin concept humanitas, but also they still have analogous ontological and ethical implications. Some of these implications are under attack in the age of transforming sciences and emerging technologies, as these developments are related to new insight that move away from a categorically dualist ontology and expand the options for educating the youth. The scientific and philosophical works of Darwin, Nietzsche, Freud have been particularly relevant for this development. They've all been strongly undermined that self-understanding that humans have that exceptional status. More recently than epigenetics, embodied theories of mind, matter, post-transhumanism, and evolutionary psychology, evolutionary aesthetics, evolutionary economics have promoted this move away from the traditional humanities. And sort of all these evolutionary approaches, they've only been developed or integrated in the various fields in the past 50 years, 60 years, sometimes even 30 years. So it's a really new development that these are being seriously considered as fields of studies. Incorporating these new theories into the humanities leads to what I call meta-humanities. I'm using the prefix meta, as meta means both beyond as well as in between. And that's different from post, because post you leave something behind. But meta is sort of that in-betweenness, the relatedness, as well as the beyondness, which captures better actually what we're trying to do. Meta-humanities lie beyond the humanities, but not in such a way that old insights are being abandoned, but in such a way that former cornerstones are being integrated in an appropriate way. Hence, meta-humanities also lie in between the humanities and new approaches such as post-human studies. Consequently, the meta-humanities can be understood as an inclusive approach. They consider a traditional version of the humanities, but at the same time they grant appropriate recognition to a new way of dealing with the world within post-human studies. The meta-humanities embrace and integrate and consider various emerging theories in their regular humanities curriculum, which adequately accommodate theories of evolution and which are non-dualist, non-anthropocentric, and non-essentialist. That means evolutionary epistemology, aesthetics, psychology, ethics, and economics, embodied theories of the mind, epigenetics, new types of spirituality and mysticism, non-dualist accounts of rights and dignity, revised concepts of the family, immanent concepts of the good life, big history as a new type of dealing with history, the relevance of cultural history with respect to norms, values, and non-anthropocentric ontologies, and the avoidance of speciesism. So here we can see really how this revised way of thinking has an impact on all the different disciplines and which need to be and which are being taken into consideration. As their insights are being widely shared, they ought to be integrated into the traditional humanities curriculum as additional topics so that the meta-humanities can come about. This idea does not imply that the new theories ought to replace the older ones, but merely that an extension of the traditional curriculum should take place so that pupils get a more inclusive education. In order to understand even the relevance of these new theories, you need to have an understanding. The future needs a past. In order to relate to the culture and see the challenges, you need to have dealt with Plato and Aristotle, even though there are many problematic aspects in them. Meta-humanities realize a twist of humanities with posthuman studies. To explain the relevance of reflections from posthuman studies, I've already analyzed elsewhere how this can be done in the case of a specific example of the field of music drama. But with each emerging technology, new philosophical challenges arise, and with it, it needs to deal with them in posthuman studies. So just when last year sort of the metaverse came about and NFTs, I directly dealt with them in my course on ethics of emerging technologies. I dealt with crypto art. And then that was wonderful to see one of my students directly bought 3 works of crypto art, and now he works in a crypto art gallery. Posthuman studies employ the emerging theoretical terminology which has been developed by post and trans and meta-humanists in order to analyze philosophical, social, and cultural phenomena, and the relevance of posthuman studies has increased significantly in the past decade. In 2014, the Third World Humanities Forum, which took place in Daejeon City in South Korea, which is organized by the UNESCO, the Ministry of Education and Republic of Korea, and the Executive Committee of the Organizing Committee, was dedicated to the topic of technology, to reflect upon how emerging technologies can be considered within the humanities. I talked about posthuman studies there. In 2017, we launched the Journal of Posthuman Studies, the first academic journal explicitly dedicated to the posthuman. In 2019, the 8th Winter School of the Estonian Graduate School of Culture Studies and Arts was concerned with the topic, the humanities and post-humanities, new ways of being human. And that was an event where there were 100 doctoral students from very many different disciplines talking about the posthuman, talking about the anthropocene. There was Stacy Limer was there, Steve Fuller was there. It was a wonderful event, sort of for a week, people getting together. And you see it, people, postdocs and doctoral students working on these issues. It's fascinating for me to understand how the consideration of posthuman reflections in the context of humanities has developed in the past couple of years. It moved from rather theoretical reflections to a dynamic era in which a great amount of complex research occurs. The enormous variety of doctoral studies as well as postdoctoral projects which are currently being researched is amazing indeed. Still, when I was asked sort of how important do you think all of that is, I sort of taking a step backwards, I still must say, well, talking to colleagues and others, many still haven't heard the words, though I think it's still niche, but it's upcoming. So, if I took a critical step, I think I must acknowledge that it's still niche in university, but one can see more and more people recognizing the relevance. Even in high schools, pupils deal with posthuman issues such as the philosophy of the series Black Mirror. Black Mirror is an amazing series. Anyway, anyone who hasn't seen it, I strongly recommend you see it. My own students are fascinated by the course Posthuman Studies, which I established in John Cabot University in Rome in spring 2016. There they write. You can write an essay on the episode Nosedive and from Netflix and the Chinese social credit system. And here it's a sort of, but reality is much more extreme. It's actually than in the episode. There's still some debate concerning the appropriate terminology to refer to clearly distinguish meta-humanities, post-humanities, and post-human studies. In a winter school in Tallinn, which took place in 2019, they employed the word post-humanities. I find the word, Rosie was also talking about post-humanities. I find the word slightly misleading. Instead of post-humanities, I prefer to use meta-humanities, as a prefix post seems to abandon the past, whereas the prefix meta means both beyond as well as in between. So it's more the integrative way. That's why I think it sort of better captures the meaning of what we're doing here. So this meta stresses that both that it's moving beyond the traditional foundation and scope of humanities, but does so in an inclusive manner, as it's in between the traditional humanities and the emerging field of post-human studies. It's important to stress that since the time of the initial development, Varro, Cicero, and others, the humanities has strongly been influenced by dualistic ontological thinking. There's a material body and a material soul, or later that there's an object and a subject, and that's a problem. What's clear, however, is that the traditional dualistic ontological framework, which was dominant in the humanities for 2,000 years, is no longer suitable for successfully dealing with our contemporary challenges. Post-Darwin, more and more people have moved away from the understanding that we've an immaterial soul and a material body, or that the subject-object distinction is the appropriate way to classify entities in the world. Critical post as well as transhumanists agree in this respect. Scholars, artists, and activists of both traditions develop their specific ways of suggesting alternatives for the future. The future is open, and our students as well as we ourselves need to face the challenges which go along with this new way of thinking. New ways of conceptualizing the world, as well as with the emerging technologies which enable us to shape the future. We all don't know what will happen in the future. Though that's what is exciting about it. It's about us shaping the future, making a change. And sort of the professor doesn't know better what will happen in the future than the students. And the students will have even more potential to actually having an impact and making some more changes. Post-human studies are concerned with all of these questions. These are the reasons why we must desperately revise our traditional dualistic ontological foundation of the humanities. We have to be more inclusive and consider the challenges which occur in post-human studies. And this is what the meta-humanities attempt to achieve. Meta-humanities do not abandon the past, but as the future needs the past. We need to study our influential, long-established dualistic ontological foundations, which have taken us to where we are right now. However, we also need to be aware of the latest technological developments, and critical post- and transhumanism in particular ought to be considered for a comprehensive conceptual understanding of the world we live in. These theories provide us with a way of speaking about these challenges so that we can actually theoretically conceptualize them. This is what is being done in the field of post-human studies. Here, reflections concerning the impact of emerging technologies in the life world are being dealt with. However, to being able to grasp all the implications of emerging technologies, a direct awareness of what digital data can do and how it can be applied is essential too. So some kind of digital literacy is needed. How can you talk about it if you lack the digital literacy? Having acquired digital literacy, the possibilities for investigations in the humanities also need to get altered. So using digital technologies within the humanities becomes an option. So you need some additional training for doing so. These new technologies provide you with new possibilities of understanding. That doesn't mean they should take over, but they provide you with an additional way of seeing things anew. In the age of the fourth industrial revolution, humanities students need to be able to reflect upon the impacts of emerging technologies. That's what post-human studies does. They need to know what digital technologies can do. They need to have some digital literacy. And they need to be able to include new technologies within their research. So some digital humanities needs to be considered. The inclusion of all these disciplines into the humanities can be referred to as meta-humanities, as it goes beyond the humanities, but it is also inclusive concerning the reflections on the latest emerging technologies. My own engagement has focused on the development of post-human studies. Posthuman studies is the engagement of the liberal arts with the impact of emerging technologies on the basis of trans and critical posthumanism. It's different from the posthumanities, which have been defined as follows. Posthumanities situates itself at a crossroads at the intersection of the humanities in its current academic configuration and the challenges it faces from posthumanism to move beyond its standard parameters and practices. Both of these disciplines are located primarily within the humanities. However, the posthumanities primarily consider the challenges from posthumanism, whereas posthuman studies are more inclusive by covering a wide range of non-dualistic emerging philosophical movements, whereby critical post and transhumanism are the most dominant intellectual approaches in this respect. But there are many other movements which get considered too. Metahumanism, Afrofuturism, there's Xenofuturism. So all of that need to be considered, and not just, again, the hegemony of one specific cultural theory. The digital humanities, on the other hand, is a discipline which can be associated with many departments: philosophy, history, literature, art history. It can also represent a separate department within the humanities or in between the humanities and computer science. And two aspects are usually covered in the digital humanities. Our research on digital culture and society and the exploration of the use of advanced technology-related methods in humanities research, which is usually the main feature of this academic discipline. As the name says, it's a discipline belonging to the humanities, which, however, employs and deals with methodologies which traditionally have been used primarily in the social and natural sciences or mathematics. In order to properly engage with the digital humanities, a solidly grounded digital literacy is needed. Digital literacy becomes a new prerequisite for these kinds of studies. It is not necessary to employ digital humanities within posthuman studies or posthumanities. It shouldn't take over. Not everyone should do that, obviously. But as both disciplines are rooted within the humanities, but digital humanities are being considered and used within both academic disciplines. In the same way, digital humanities slowly receive additional consideration within more and more humanities departments all over the world. Awareness of the latest technologies, as well as the capacity to use technologies, becomes permanently more important for experts in the humanities. If you want to reflect on these issues, you need to know how cryptocurrencies works. You need to know what a wallet is, a private key, a public key, how that relates to the blockchain technology. And only then, by the means of the calculations to create a new block, then you can understand the energies which are needed in order to create new blocks. And then you see the connections to climate change again. So it is some technological understanding is essential for that. And that is really strongly being missing among many humanities scholars. This doesn't mean, however, that the skills which one can learn in the humanities become less important in an age which is characterized by an increase of digitalization, automation, and other emerging technologies. The capacities to think outside of the box and to be creative are central skills in an area of digital quantification. And these skills are not helpful solely for humanities scholars, but also for natural scientists. Hence, it's advisable to also make certain humanities courses obligatory for natural scientists. So it's not the case, and that's a widely shared worry when I mention sort of the relevance of digital humanities, digital literacy. So it's all about natural scientists taking over the humanities. That's not the case. We both need to benefit from each other's sort of skills. So natural scientists develop further their skill to think outside of the box. Natural scientists need to learn to embrace words in the same way as humanities experts need to learn to embrace numbers. This is what a twisting of traditional disciplines implies. It's not just the case that natural scientists are taking over the humanities department. Analogous movements need to occur within the natural scientists. They need to take some, if you do engineering, you need to have taken some ethics courses. And that's sort of in medicine, ethics should become an obligatory or some historical understanding. So it's again, that doesn't mean that every physician should become an expert in bioethics, but some understanding of the relevance. So it's not just a one-sided development and just humanities scholars lose further jobs because the natural scientists enter the humanities departments. It's also the other way around. Furthermore, there are additional fields of academic studies which are concerned with the impact of technologies. In the social sciences, technologies are primarily being investigated on an empirical basis. Here one finds science technology studies, STS, which is concerned with science and technology as social material phenomena, including their historical and contemporary production and the associated forms of knowledge, expertise, social organizations, and controversy. STS again needs to be distinguished clearly from future studies, futurology, which according to the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy can be defined as follows: the activity of predicting the state of the world at some future time by extrapolating from present trends, and that's mainly a pseudoscience given the complexities of social, political, economic, technological, and natural factors. So anyone who says sort of that's what the world's going to be like in 50, 100 years, that's just, no one can do that. I mean, that's a pseudoscience. That's not a realistic endeavor. That's futurology. So neither STS, no posthuman studies or the posthumanities have anything to do with futurology. Even though posthuman studies is an inclusive discipline, it's also relevant to keep in mind that this doesn't mean that there are no limitations and that anything goes. The developments in the realm of posthuman philosophies are extremely dynamic. The standards are not yet as established as they are in other disciplines. Various approaches challenge the intellectual groundings on which research used to take place. This makes posthuman studies a vibrant, exciting, and challenging academic field to deal with. However, this is also the reason why it attracts some self-styled prophets. By reflecting upon the concept of the discipline and the limits of scholarly academic reflections, it becomes possible to separate solid scholarship on posthuman issues from ungrounded prophecies. It's intellectually exciting to realize how the quality of scholarship has increased in the past 15 years. You know, just from 2009, that here in the first Young Humanism Conference was organized, and then now to see the developments in the past 15 years is just fascinating. Meta-humanities neither do futurology nor STS. It's important to highlight some misunderstandings when one is dealing with emerging technologies from a meta-humanities perspective. Doing meta-humanities does not aim for predictions of what the world will be like in 50 or 100 years. Such predictions belong to the realm of futurology and do not have anything in common with proper scientific endeavors. Science technology studies, on the other hand, are a scientific enterprise. They do not belong to the field of meta-humanities either, as STS deals with the impact of technologies primarily from an empirical basis, and thus belongs to the field of social sciences. So it's more the data analysis, it's more the empirical studies, which is much more important. And that's already social sciences. This doesn't mean that empirical studies are of no relevance whatsoever in the humanities, in the meta-humanities. However, the prime relevance is not solely being attributed to empirical studies in the meta-humanities. The cultural, intellectual, and philosophical background of empirical data always needs to be dealt with and reflected upon. And this is a prime difference between STS and posthuman studies. So STS focused primarily on empirical data, but when it comes to empirical data, posthuman studies always grant as much relevance to the theoretical intellectual foundation as to the data which are being considered. Concerning the intellectual foundations, the philosophies of trans, critical, post, and meta-humanism are particularly noteworthy. It's not sufficient to merely integrate posthuman studies into the humanities for bringing about meta-humanities. Additional disciplines also need to be granted the appropriate relevance. Besides posthuman studies, the digital humanities are central, which use technological means for investigating issues that have been of intellectual concern in the humanities. The decisive innovation concerning digital humanities is that new technologies, in particular digitalization, enable scholars to generate insight that could not have been generated before. Which words have been dominant in Kerouac's writings during the various phases of his career? Which words have been popular during which period of time in Japan? And what does it say about the dominant cultural concerns? You need to have the digitized data, literal data, in order to do this analysis. Is there a correlation between the quantity a word is used and the relevance concerning the author's goal in various countries all over the world? So in many of the cases, digital versions of texts and data analysis skills are needed. If this is the case, humanities scholars also need to develop new skills, like digital literacy. I'm not claiming that all the research in the humanities or meta-humanities has to be founded on complex digital skills. Obviously not. However, in the same way as a scholar needs to be able to write, surf the web, and use the computer, a more complex digital literacy is becoming relevant for studying meta-humanities. In a liberal arts university, a separate course teaching digital literacy should be mandatory as a general proficiency requirement for all students. You need to be able to deal with an Excel sheet. That's simply a skill which nowadays has become simply so relevant. In the same way, students need to be able to deal with numbers and words. Students need to feel comfortable in the digital world because it's become so important. Hence, a course on digital literacy should become a general proficiency requirement. This doesn't mean, by the way, that digital literacy is part of the meta-humanities. It would be more appropriate to regard it as a prerequisite for successfully being able to study meta-humanities. The meta-humanities consist of the humanities, but are being supplemented by digital humanities, post-human studies, as well as various other emerging theories which adequately accommodate theories of evolution and which are non-dualist, non-anthropocentric, and non-essentialist. As a prerequisite for studying meta-humanities, students need to be able to write and calculate, but they also need to have taken a course on digital literacy and ethics as mandatory general core requirements which are needed for all different majors. So if you go into the direction, in the natural sciences, some ethical, some philosophical understanding, some of these courses need to be dealt with. That's just a skill which anyone needs. By taking digital literacy courses, students who primarily use words get a more comprehensive grounding for their research. By taking an ethics course, students who primarily deal with numbers get a more comprehensive understanding of their field of studies. And they also realize, well, the prejudices concerning what I'm doing when I'm developing a new technology, a new device, my prejudices, my norms are not universally valid. I need to be able to distance myself. I need to realize the contingency of my own prejudice. The current paradigm shift is not a one-way street in which natural scientists take over the humanities. However, in the same way as meta-humanities students need to become familiar with digital technologies, natural science students need to develop a sensitivity for the impact of their endeavors. Ethics and applied ethics provide natural science students with a helpful preparation for their careers. After having taken general core requirement courses on post-human studies and digital humanities ought to be offered. In addition to offering post-human studies and digital humanities, various other emerging theories which adequately accommodate theories of evolution and which are non-dualist, non-anthropocentric, and non-essentialist also need to be integrated in the courses. What does it mean in practical terms? No matter which course is being taught in the meta-humanities, a broad overview of available theories needs to be accommodated. If an ethics course is taught, it's no longer sufficient to merely consider deontological, utilitarian, and virtue ethical approaches, but more critical theories which regard all values and norms as fictions also ought to be considered. So it sort of really provides the students with a broad overview, not only with the history, but also what is going on right now. And that sort of really ought to be made mandatory, that a consideration of the latest developments gets included in the courses. If a course on epistemology gets taught, it's not sufficient to merely deal with theories of divine intuition, British empiricism, or continental rationalism, but evolutionary epistemologies also ought to be dealt with. A course on the philosophies of art must not solely consider theories that claim that we desire art for the art's sake, that art ought to reveal the form of the good, or that contemporary works of art must not be beautiful, as in the Frankfurt School. But it also ought to investigate beauty from an evolutionary perspective, for example. Reflect upon the possibility of genetically engineered organisms as artworks and highlight the absurdity of humans who create beautiful forms while they are embedded in a continuous fight for survival. It's really absurd. Now, if we take that evolutionary understanding of humans, us fighting to survive, and then we go to a concert hall to listen to beauty for the beauty's sake. From an evolutionary perspective, all that is highly problematic. I mean, at least realizing the absurdity of that makes you maybe rethink also the meaning of art. Hence, each course ought to incorporate both historically established theories, but also some cutting-edge reflections which clearly move beyond the established prejudices of traditional theories. Hence, some rather radical changes are needed to transform the humanities into the meta-humanities. Post-human studies course. At John Cabot University in Rome, I developed a course entitled Post-Human Studies in 2016. EVA Women's University, so whoever is interested, EVA Women's University, which is the biggest women's university in the world, they've launched an MA and doctoral program in post-human studies. In spring 2021, the Post-Human Studies Reader, which was edited by Evi Sampaniko and Jan Stasienko, has been published. Includes seminal texts from the wider range of beyond humanism approaches, which have been divided up into transhumanism, critical posthumanism, and meta-humanism. A pedigree of the intellectual ancestor and the development towards a post-human paradigm shift has also been presented as part of the reader. The various institutional endeavors in the field of post-human studies makes it clear that the great variety of beyond humanism philosophies represent a helpful intellectual tool for approaching the various post-human challenges. They enable students, scholars, and intellectualists to engage with, face, and deal with the wide range of permanently new challenges which arise in the field and which have to do with all the aspects of the life world, from religion via politics and economics to the wide range of artistic disciplines. I'm coming to my concluding remarks. The post-human paradigm shift has implications for structuring of higher education. In addition to students taking mathematics and language courses, new skills become essential, in particular digital skills and a sensitivity for ethical challenges, as new technologies imply new moral challenges. Hence, it seems necessary to expand the list of courses that belong to the general core requirements. Digital literacy and ethics course seem to be relevant for preparing students for the challenges of our times. Yet the general core requirement courses are merely meant to serve as a preparation for being able to deal with more specialized skills. Concerning the more specialized skills in the field of humanities, 3 suggestions were dealt with here, such that the humanities can be transformed into the meta-humanities. Firstly, a course which deals with the meaning and the impact of emerging technologies and which provides students with a theoretical grounding for verbally addressing and dealing with these challenges, like a post-human studies course. By having dealt with the various theories in the field, you have a way of talking about these challenges. You have an understanding of what's actually going on in technologies. Secondly, a digital humanities course which enables students to develop digital skills for handling research questions which so far couldn't be dealt with, as digital technologies represent a prerequisite for generating the data necessary for corresponding reflections. Thirdly, all professors in the meta-humanities ought to be encouraged to expand the range of topics which are being covered in a course, so that students are also being confronted with the latest challenges in the field of studies and not only with the dominant approaches, reflections, and theories of the past. This is really something, always find the contemporary relevance, the contemporary impact, and the latest developments, and not just do history. Because we develop these skills in order to engage with the world we live in, not just do history for the sake of history. All these reflections concerning the meta-humanities are meant as an initial stimulus for reflecting on education in an age of the post-human. And these thoughts are not meant to represent a final word on the concept of the meta-humanities, but they should merely serve as a contingent suggestion. Hence, I'm already looking forward to further reflections, replies, and challenges concerning this line of thought I suggested. The future needs a past, and the war is the father of all things. Both insights also apply to the question of higher education in the age of the post-human paradigm shift. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for this wonderfully engaging talk. When I was thinking, like preparing for today and thinking meta-humanities, what makes it stand out, my first thought was that, like, considering all humanities, but all academic fields, all professions, basically, is that we cannot isolate from technological development and technological shifts, because technology is now embroidered into the fabric of very life. So in the context of humanities, you cannot do humanities if you don't look around and see what's happening around you and see what's happening to you. So I was also thinking about the concept of meta-humanities as you defined it. And what first came to mind was 2012 book, Transformative Humanities, a manifesto by Mikhail Epstein. I don't know if you know that one. It's if you haven't read it, it's, I give you my warm recommendation, because what Epstein talks about is exactly what Rosie was mentioning, what you were talking about, but just using different terminology. But he actually talked about the threatened status of the humanities in conjunction with recent technological developments. And he urges scholars to shift from a mindset of post to proto. So basically he talks about proto-humanities, and he conceptualized this notion of protoism, defined as the study of emerging, not yet formed phenomena. So this is something that Rosie was also mentioning, the seed. So he criticizes the use of post, as in post-human, post-modern, and goes rather for the option of proto, of something that is yet to be, of the potentialities. And also he sees that the necessity of the humanities to evolve in the sense, as you were mentioning, like to embrace the new technologies and the reality that is happening. So I wanted to ask you whether you see a parallel and the differences between meta-humanities and proto-humanities, as I just briefly described.
I mean, sort of the usage of the word is important on the one hand. On the other hand, what sort of the decisive element of what I'm trying to suggest is sort of, it shouldn't be like one hegemonic theory which gets replaced by another one, and that's why. And there's such a, and that's why I'm sort of. It shouldn't be just critical posthumanism. That transhumanism is very strong, and many people embrace it, and you can criticize it, but you need to be aware of the impact and what they talk about. And there again, and one should also take into consideration, it's extremely fascinating sort of what goes on with Afrofuturism and other approaches, and sort of to see, and sort of not just to be left in the Western tradition. I understand courses just for practical purpose, maybe there's a sort of more focus than in the Western tradition, but there should be an openness to consider other approaches. You know, and I'm obviously aware there's a time limitation. There's, you know, whatever, you need to leave something else out. But, you know, at least trying to make the attempt of accommodating others. And sort of, and it's about making people aware of the plurality of different approaches, also of the plurality of different approaches which take place at the moment. And then, it's my personal, sort of, it's my approach. Actually, the students leaving my classes, they don't know where I stand. I argue with them, and I'm the devil's advocate. So whatever you say, I argue against it, even if you say exactly what I personally subscribe to. And I might convince someone converting to Catholicism after leaving my class. I hope not, but you know, that can happen. So I'm always trying to present, really make the other approach as strongly as possible in order for the students to have an argument, basically for defending his or her position, for getting a better critical understanding for what they actually themselves subscribe to and stick to, and then it's you know, it's good that we have the great plurality of different responses, and I'm happy if someone's able to very well justify his or her position. Then that is sort of the important. That is the important part of making people aware of the diversity of positions, and that's why I personally find it. I'm aware of sort of as a professor being in a position of power, and students, when they know that the professor stands for something, they get scared. They think, do I have to say what the professor says in order to get a good grade? And that's why I find it difficult or problematic if someone is too strong in affirming his or her position during the lectures. I really strongly encourage to leave that out. I do that when I go out and give talks or give interviews. Then I say, this is what I stand for. Or if someone actually asks me in class, and says, yeah, what do you actually think about that? And said, well, I'm not going to talk about that here. If you want to find out, you know, there are books, read the books or whatever. They're not going to do so. I'm aware of that too. But and so instead of just focusing now, I've explained my reason why I think meta-humanities makes sense. I don't want to be so focused now on the specific terminology, but the important thing is to integrate you know, it's not just other dominant theory, but to show the various options and the dominant streams which currently occur, and that is something which, you know, the humanities. One example, just I was invited to talk on a big aesthetics conference in Germany a long time ago. That was dedicated to technology. And I was so happy about art technology, that's cool. I was looking forward to the presentation. And basically all of the presentations stopped 50 years ago. You know, they talked about maybe the technology of printing in the 15th century. It's an important topic, you know, you can deal with that. But basically no one dared to address the issues in the past 50 years. When I mentioned something like bioart, the fluorescent rabbit, they would say, well, what concept of art do you have? Is that really work of art? Isn't that fascism? Someone's creating, changing, you know, altering a living being, like eugenics procedures. And that's not really art. You know, what concept of art do you actually subscribe to? You know, we need more of a historical distance in order to see whether it actually stays. And there's really a strong reluctance or hesitation in just to see what is and embrace, well, not even embrace it, but just to acknowledge what is going on. And I think we as humanities scholars have the appropriate skills to deal with current issues, and that's our task. If I was just interested in studying history for the sake of history, trying to understand what Homer actually said, then I wouldn't have done, you know, I wouldn't have become a philosopher. That's not, then I would probably, you know, would have preferred to become an entrepreneur and change the world or whatever. That, you know, that's not meaningful to me. So I want to engage with issues which are currently relevant, and we have the appropriate skills for doing so. And that's why we need to take into consideration what's actually going on and to find a response to these issues.
Actually, I purposefully threw in Epstein's proto-humanities because just to show, not to deal with the language as you said, but just to show the plurality of the same goal, for how to put it that way. Yeah, that's why. And I will go back to the question that we had with Rosie's lecture. How much time do we have? I mean, you're doing an amazing effort and an amazing work in introducing the courses into academia, also with the journal. So, what is your not time estimate, but do you think it's possible to have these kind of approaches dominant in academia, in humanities, for example?
The reluctance to take them on board are enormous. Just to have a course on such a topic, people doubt whether one should actually do so, and just any small revision. There's so much discussion taking place for hours and hours in the committees. So I'm aware that sort of academic structures are such that they really changes always. They're not radical changes. You need to take each little step. I'm trying just writing and talk to people, make people aware. Then others might think that's important. Then they do that in their institution. They establish a course on the posthuman. And right now we're thinking about sort of, I think as part of the general requirements which are needed in sort of liberal arts at my university, I'm trying to push we have English literature, we have English language and literature courses, we have mathematics and natural science courses, but you know, you need nowadays some philosophy, some ethics, this is really something which that's needed. In addition, and one should also consider, and I do think sort of the digitalization really has an enormous impact on the world we live in. I mean, we only have, sort of the smartphone came about 15 years ago. the public use of the internet was established in 1990. That's 32 years ago. That's, historically speaking, that's nothing. But now, you know, anyone's got a smartphone. And anyone really means anyone, even in the lesser developed countries. That's an enormous possibility in many respects, also challenges. But that's why that's why some digital literacy skills are also needed, basically, to being able to use the technologies in the appropriate manner. So I would also strongly encourage even the ones born, the digital natives, they don't all have the appropriate digital skills, but they usually have more skills than the professors. That's also something, luckily that was changed a little bit during the COVID crisis, so many were forced to take on board, develop these skills, but there's still, I think, something more which needs to be done and needs to be integrated actually also structurally on developing some further developed skills as a sort of a general core requirement before actually embarking on other studies.
Thank you so much. I will stop myself now with the questions and open the discussion with the conference participants.
This is on. So I'm trying to get into my own fears right now with this question. Like when we mention some things like technological development and the genetical modifications, there's always some sort of fear that they bring. And I try to understand where does it come from. And I'm thinking about how during all these days we talk a lot about how we should deal ethically towards others, towards nature and technologies both ways. But I think that fear comes from the question, will they deal ethically with us?
Will they?
Will they deal ethically with us? Now, of course, we cannot talk human ethics in context of nature and technologies, but I cannot find the words. For someone who doesn't really know a lot of biology or a lot of technology, sometimes it seems they function more on like logics of survival or just rational logics. And can we find ethical way of coexistence without being established on humanly understood ethics? So I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
That's sort of the question. You know, what is the appropriate response when we deal with such issues as climate change, some global issues? And here, well, sort of the responses given, and here it's quite interesting to see sort of the different responses given by critical posthumanists and the ones more by transhumanists. Sort of when we see the critical posthumanist response, it's more to always take the complexities of the specific situation into consideration, not to find not a general response of personhood or, you know, some right issues. That's a different way of talking about these issues. In the transhumanist context, it would still be they're not all libertarian. That's also important, but they do have a more liberal grounding in the sense of. Yeah, in the end, it should be someone's action, him or herself, who gets evaluated. In the sense, let me give you a precise example. So if we deal with what would be the appropriate, I do one example, something I do actually with the students. So mindfulness meditation. So you confront them then with eating a piece of meat, a piece of pork. And then you start thinking about the traces and relationalities. You start thinking, where does a piece of meat come from? Then you start, you know, there's the factory farms. They're all being stored there. Then anyone who's seen sort of pigs getting slaughtered will become vegetarian for at least a week. You see sort of the animal cruelty connected in animal rights issues. You see the challenges connected to carbon dioxide emissions which take place. They're enormous. They're actually stronger for cattle. They're stronger for cows rather than pigs. But they also have some. Then there's a pollution of the soil which becomes relevant. Then obviously the pigs always get ill. Some pig is always ill, so that they preventively give antibiotics in all the factory farms. As a consequence, sort of antibiotic-resistant cells come about, which again has a consequence on us humans. When we need antibiotics, then they might no longer work. And there are clear studies and indications that once we a higher consumption of red meat increases the likelihood of colon cancer. So this is actually a nice enterprise to make people aware. If you ask people to understand how biology, ethics, how economics, all the things are different things are related, to make them aware that there's a close interrelationality between the various issues and why they study what they study. Yeah, and what is now the best possible response? And sort of, do you find, is it having a veggie day, starting to forbidding people to eat or only have vegetarian meat in public mensas, and forcing people to do that? Or would it be a more appropriate way to deal with? And here we see, for example, here to develop in vitro meat, and we've seen in vitro meat being developed. And they're already on the market in Singapore and Hong Kong. They've initially taken from stem cells from the animals, but then they put in nourishment solution and they develop further and further. And now they're so cheap that they actually, well, it's allowed to serve them in burgers in Hong Kong and China, in Hong Kong and Singapore. And here you don't have to, you avoid all the other issues with factory farming, and actually you have the purest kind of meat. No animal gets slaughtered. It might be even vegetarian. That's an open question for some vegetarians. For others, it might not. And you've got no antibiotics, no drugs being given. That's really pure. It might even be more tastier than the regular meat. And there are possibilities to develop this kind of meat further. So these are the questions. You show the different alternatives and responses. So the one response would be, well, actually trying to implement a consideration for the animals by implementing regulations, forbidding things. Well, the initial step could be just to advertise things. It's not good for you. Not many people in practice. It doesn't really, that's sort of my very pessimistic response. It just doesn't really work efficiently. That's why, so then if you actually need to do something, then what would be another option? Yet to start to forbid eating meat. That's quite a, strong implication as well, paternalistic implication. So again, that's why sort of people with a more technological orientation would say, well, we find a technological fix. We create in vitro meat. And there's actually a lot, there seems to be a lot of benefit in that respect. It might be better quality of meat, less all the other issues which we faced with when concentrating how factory farming happens and all the challenges occur. And then you see when one gets confronted with the different possibilities, and then we develop and think further, and we find hopefully a better solution to the various responses. I personally, it might have already come out. So I think once you, and this is a criticism, and I've actually had that with a discussion with Rosie sometime, and she didn't like that very much. I said, well, basically, sort of the relational ethical approaches. That's particularly bad when it was in discussion with her, because I said it has paternalistic implications, and she's afraid. And I think actually I have good reason for doing so. But because in the end, it's what's a way to regulate? Then you need to forbid things. How does relational ethics work? I've got the example in China, there are relational structures in Confucianism, the traditional religious system. And now in the Chinese social credit system, there's a possibility if there was a young boy who wanted to study at university, and he passed all the tests, the necessary requirements to study at the university. But he was not accepted. Why was he not accepted? Because his dad didn't pay back a credit. He had a debt which he didn't pay back, and his dad being indebted had an impact on the value, on the social value of the son. That's relational ethics. It's not your actions which count. It's you only count in relation to the others. It's your value depends. If your friends watch too much porn, if your friends have problematic sexual behavior, your value changes. And that's why I think sort of that type of relational ethics, I find that problematic. I don't like these. I think these have potential. These are paternalistic implications. That's why I haven't found a good answer to that question, which doesn't lead to these implications. That's why, in the end, my own suggestion is one which I say, well, actually, we need to. I draw upon the notion of autonomy. I'm aware autonomy ontologically doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We entangled relational beings. There are no autonomous humans ontologically. But that doesn't mean that autonomy is not a useful notion in the ethical context. It's a fiction, but it's a useful fiction because it has sort of implications which, they work. It might not be a perfect solution. It definitely isn't a perfect solution, but it's an as good as it gets solution. That's the best I can offer. But I'm open for the dialogue in order to see, if you've got better arguments to offer, then I'll revise my position. But that's why even though I analyze sort of the world in a relationalist way, I still think, no, actually, a liberal ethics of fictive autonomy, that's what I would subscribe to. Autonomy is a fiction, but the consideration in the end is really a central achievement in order to avoid also religious and political paternalistic structures. One should listen to what the individual has to say. Being aware that who the individual is, the possibilities has is always historically embedded, and there are always injustices really, aware of all these challenges, but it's still sort of as good as it gets. Yeah.
Thank you, Stefan. I like the notion of useful fiction. Okay, we have time for one more question, maybe two if they're brief. Okay.
Okay, I have read some of your texts, but I think today is the first day I've listened to you talk directly about nature. I must agree with you on the forbidding of eating animals on the praxis. It's not possible. Coming from another conference, you might know what I mean. But in your talk, I think I've heard that you said about blockchain and cryptocurrency and NFTs, how these affect climate change. Yeah. You said to know the system, to change the system? Yeah.
So I sort of mentioned, well, in order to actually have an understanding, sort of to criticize and talk about that with our critical perspectives, being trained in the humanities, there is a need just to, not just to repeat sort of what others have said, but actually do grapple with how the basic structures, how the technologies work. You don't have to study biology to get a full grasp, or you don't have to study computer science to get a full grasp of how that works. But to understand why there's such an enormous amount of energy consumption related to blockchain technologies. And it's related because, well, in the sense, in order to create a new block, a certain calculations need to be made. A certain mathematical calculation needs to be solved. And the mathematical, and obviously by creating, the ones who create a new block are the ones who receive money for that. They receive some cryptocurrencies for that. And they can make, the more these cryptocurrencies are worth, the more interested people in getting the blockchain. So there are like thousands and thousands of people who are trying to make the calculations in order to create the new block in the blockchain. but only one person wins. Only one person solves the calculation, and only that person actually gets paid for, gets the money. Only the winner takes it all, because only the winner gets paid for the money for having created the block. But there are, thousands of people wasting, really just blowing off the energy, loads of energy in order to trying to solve the calculation. How to deal with that? It's not such an easy issue. In the sense of, well, if the energy prices are too high, it won't be worth it anyway to making the calculation. Then you might go to a different country where the energy prices are lower. And so, there are a great variety of perfection. But the important issue is just to have a general technological understanding of why at all something like energy consumption is related to blockchain technologies. And the issue is really about the mining about just thousands of people trying to solve a mathematical calculation, but in the end, it's just one person who actually gets it. And the rest of the energy, this just goes away for nothing. But you can't forbid them from trying to get the money either. So these are really complex issues, and there's no clear-cut good solution. But that's why I stress, in order to use our capacities as critical thinkers, you just need to do, people need to get introduced to some technological understanding. What the wallet is, what the private, the public key is, how a smart contract works, for example, when we talk about these issues. How the NFTs, where the NFTs get established. And that's important practical knowledge. And then, only then, you can use the theoretical skills appropriately to and not just what I read in so many ethics texts from in the culture study. So they talk about gene technologies. Okay, that doesn't make any sense to anyone who's in the field. It really, it's not gene technologies, not even gene enhancement technologies. You need to clearly distinguish. There's a possibility of genetic selection after in vitro fertilization and pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Here you have the possibility to select fertilized egg, to select plasticist. Does a plasticist have human dignity, and so on? The issue of selection. But then there's another technology if we deal with CRISPR-Cas9, genome editing, the possibility of genetic modification. Here you already have an entity which you genetically modify. Modification is very different from bringing an entity into existence. Then we've got the possibility of bioprinting, where you've got a three-dimensional bioprinter, where you put in some sugar and some liquids, and then you actually print life. Then we've got the possibility, that's what recently, they've put stem cells from various entities together in order to create a new living entity on the basis of stem cells. What's the role of stem cells? So, and very often in cultural studies texts and in also post-human texts I read, they talk about, oh, it's all genetic technology is all evil. And then there's a need of getting understanding of a technology, otherwise you will not be taken seriously by anyone in the field. And that's just happening very widely. And that's just an enormous lack. And which really needs to be dealt with. And the text might not be exciting to read, or it might be complex to get an understanding. But if you want to be taken seriously, do get an understanding of it, how the things work. Don't study. It's not studying computer science, but in getting a basic understanding of how these things and being aware of the relevant distinction. That's teen technologies. There's such a wide difference of different technologies, and you just need to have an understanding of the technologies which are morally different from each other.
Okay, I think it's a very complex equation, and I believe I understand how many in the field go to positive nihilism, to be honest. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, in order to keep to the schedule, I would like to thank you once again for thought-provoking lecture and discussion. And I would like to, I'm sure you have more questions, and I would like to invite you to ask these questions during the coffee break.